ప్రేమ స్వరూపులారా, విద్యార్థులారా, who am I.
Welcome to InSAIde Scoop, a podcast that brings you practical servings of Swami's sweetest teachings. On today's episode, we are speaking with the multi-talented Sister Aishwarya, who is a biomedical engineer by training, working on innovative projects in the medical field. She's also served as an EHV teacher and the former National Deputy Youth Coordinator of Malaysia. Hi, Aish. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Mira. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. So I'm just going to jump right into the topic by asking you what's been troubling me lately. And that is that Swami says we should run away from bad company. We all know that. And he also says that we have no right to judge his children. So how do we reconcile these two? Don't we sort of have to judge to assess if our company is good or bad?
Yeah, no, I totally see the conundrum, which is often the way with Swami, right? So, I think typically when I read or listen to what Swami says, I like to take a step back and think about context for a bit. So everything Swami says is to guide us further in our spiritual journey, right? And so when I think of this, the first distinction here is that when we talk about good and bad company, it's not really about passing judgment on someone else, but rather it's about understanding the impact of another person's company on you.
Right. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so good company, the way Swami describes it, is that which brings you Godward or ahead in your spiritual practice. And bad company is that which takes you away from that. So do we need to make an assessment? Yes, definitely, like in terms of how it's affecting you. But do we need to judge a person? Then I'd say, no, not necessarily. Instead, we look inward at how we are behaving or reacting to something. And then we discriminate between company that's good for your spiritual journey and then company that's not so good for your spiritual journey.
Very interesting, Aish, but forgive me, but I still have a problem with distinguishing from judging and discriminating because there seems to be a little bit of an overlap.
Yeah.
How do you draw the difference?
Yeah, no, I can see that. It's sometimes it's, the terminology is never easy to decipher straight away. In spiritual practice, the way I've heard it described, and actually like this description, is when you talk about judging is an emotional reaction to things, but discrimination is to see things as they are.
Right.
Nice, right? It's like a nice one sentence,
very, very helpful,
simple distinction. Yeah. And when Swami talks about discrimination, he says that you have to use your buddhi or your intellect and not your mind, which is where all the desires, sorrows, likes, etc. come from.
Right.
So you could say that when you judge, you're acting from the base of your mind, and when you discriminate, you're acting from your intellect. And if we think about why that's important, Swami actually describes these levels. He says sense organs are superior to the body, and the mind is superior to the sense organs, and the intellect to the mind. And beyond that, the Atma is superior to the intellect. So for a typical person, like me, who is not self-realized, the level of the intellect is the closest that you can get to your Atma. And so by using your intellect, you can understand and experience the self or the Atma. And really, for the Atma, you don't need discrimination even, because you just know what the truth is.
Right.
But for the spiritual seeker who's still trying to get there, then you use discrimination from your intellect to seek that truth and not judgment from your mind level.
That's a very useful distinction, Aish. So to summarize, judgment is an emotional reaction from the level of the mind, whilst discriminating is seeing things as they are from the level of the intellect or the Atma. And, it's great that you say that, because I often feel that when I'm interacting with people, I see almost two realities, you know. One is the version of that person that I'm seeing through the eyes of my past relationship with them, and like my memories with them, any sort of issues we've had in the past. And one version of them is the version that is closer to what's actually happening before my eyes, you know. Right. So I want to break this down, this distinction that you've given us down with a few real life examples. Say you have a friend who drinks excessively, and you feel that you don't want to associate yourself with that person. How would judging versus discrimination and seeing things as it is look and sound like in this situation?
Yeah, so interesting. I love how you sum that up about how there are two different versions of a person to you. But yeah, thinking about this example, I think what's happened here is you've identified a habit in a person that you feel is important to stay away from. Right. And so likely when this friend is drinking excessively, it makes you feel something, right? You're having this emotional reaction. Maybe it's disgust, maybe it makes you annoyed or angry at their behavior, or even simply you're just concerned about shielding yourself to this particular habit at this point in your life, right? And it's totally normal to have these reactions. We are not yet fully enlightened souls unless you have a secret you haven't told me, Nira.
No secrets.
But yeah, so I think it's so normal for us to have these emotional reactions. But I think then what we can do is to raise our level a little bit and make this distinction between the person and the habits. We don't have to define this person by that particular habit, right? So to see things as they are is then to say, yes, this person drinks excessively and it makes me angry and this isn't good for my spiritual journey. So for now, I'm going to keep a bit of a distance.
Beautiful, Aish. So seeing things as they are sounds like observing it without the extra drama or the story we kind of tell ourselves, right? To put it
absolutely.
And separating the behavior from that person is one way to do it. And you know, as you were speaking, I remembered the story that one of my Balvikas teachers told me. I can't remember the details exactly, so I'm just going to tell you what I remember. There was this, it was something about how this Zen teacher took 3 of his disciples to for a morning walk, and they passed a forest, and the Zen teacher pointed at a red flower, okay? And then asked the 3 disciples one by one, what can they see? And the first disciple said, oh, I gave this flower to a girl I was in love with many years ago, or something like that, okay? I might be exaggerating because I can't remember exactly. And then the second disciple said something like, oh, this flower is so beautiful. I hope we can offer it to the Buddha shrine later. Like, we should take it, we should pluck it. Right. And the third disciple said, oh, this flower is a symbol of enlightenment. Okay. And the teacher was so disappointed because all he wanted them to say was that, to observe was that the flower was moving in the wind. But the first disciple was so caught up with his past and his love in the past. The flower reminded him of that, right? And that's what he saw. And the second disciple was so taken up by the beauty of the flower, it was trying to recreate like this future pleasure by, oh, we need to pick it and move towards the future kind of an attitude, right? And the third one was just like a super conceptual beings, like, oh, I know all the textbook answers. And it's like, you know, so I felt like when you were explaining how we should see people as they are in helping us navigate this issue, it kind of, you know, it highlighted some of the errors that these disciples were making, and maybe some of the mistakes we make as well, right? That we travel between past and future. Would you agree, Aish?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a nice story and good of you to remember it so well. I'm sure your teacher will be super proud.
I missed certain bits and exaggerated, but
No, it's very interesting. Yeah, I completely agree with you there. And I think you summed it up very well when you said to see things as they are is to leave the drama behind. And these three disciples all had some kind of conditioning, right? Some kind of emotional like linkage that they put on this poor flower. that all it was doing was moving in the wind.
Yeah. So let's dive deeper into this. Let's say we've made a conscious choice to stay away from someone who drinks excessively without labeling them or anything like that. But in staying away from them, how do we practice other core teachings of Swami, like, acceptance, tolerance, forgiveness, and also giving them that space to grow and improve, Yeah.
No, it's very interesting. I would say yet another conundrum Swami has thrown our way, right? Let's come back then to looking at the context again, right? And I sometimes think, Swami, he's like a parent, right? He tells you to stay away from bad company because he wants to give you the chance to develop your own strength and your own moral character, and not necessarily be influenced by what that doesn't serve you well at that time. And when you're growing up, your parents will do the same, right? They have a natural tendency to want to protect you from what they perceive to be negative influences. And sometimes society, can get a little overzealous in how they scare you away from certain things, right? And I remember that when I went off to college in London, I had all these like preconceived notions about how people who behaved in this way must be, bad, or if they did this and this and this, they were good. But I was just really awakened, exposed to such a variety of different people. Right. Who were so interesting, really interesting combinations of both good and bad habits and actions. And for me, I think it was just a good experience to understand that people are complex and everyone has their own spiritual journey. And if we're placed together for a time, it's because we need to be. And actually, I'm reminded of a nice analogy that Swami gives here, right? He talks about a plant and how when the plant is young and it's tender and it's starting to grow, it has to be protected, because when the tree is young and growing, all these various animals might eat it and might even kill it. And so for this reason, a fence is placed around the young tree to protect it. Right. But when the tree is grown, it doesn't need any protection anymore. The same animals who might have destroyed it now seek and find shade and shelter beneath its branches.
Beautiful.
And so I think that, we can tie that back a bit to how our maturity in our spiritual development, say you're now the big tree and have the capacity to give shade to help someone else in their journey, then by all means do it, right? And at this point, this person that might have been bad company when you were a young tree is not bad company anymore because it doesn't affect you in the same way. And I think this is an important distinction to make. Like, what's bad company for you today may not be tomorrow or to someone else, because we're all in different places in our spiritual journey. And personally, like my own rule for myself, you were asking like, how do we really practice this? I really believe, and this is for me one of Swami's like most important teachings, and if I had to sum up everything Swami says in one, this is what I would say, is to build a very strong connection to yourself, your inner consciousness, and feel for yourself what is appropriate for you right now and what is not appropriate for you right now. And as you grow, your capacity will also change, and knowing that for yourself is so helpful.
That's really nice, Aish. And I particularly like how you said what was bad for you in the past or a year ago may not have the same effect a year later or moments later, right? And so from what I understand, you're kind of telling us that it's actually where we are at, right? Because so the circumstances could be circumstances are actually neutral. The company is neutral. It's bad if we are susceptible to it. right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, apart from like violence and other things which are obviously, yeah, they're objectively bad, most other things largely depend on how susceptible we are to it as an influence, right? So that's very helpful. For example, I've had experiences where someone makes body shame somebody else or body shames me, and I get so triggered
Oh gosh.
and label this person as mean. Okay, just blanket mean, not talking to this person mean. And then I reflect on why I was so angry and I start thinking about, was it me? Was it really them? Or was I angry at myself for not being able to respond to the challenge that this person created, right? And then when I think about it more and more, I realize that if I continue to get caught up in, oh, this person is good or bad and the labels or mean, I lose the ability to understand the teaching moment for myself. Like, maybe I had my own insecurities with body image, and that's why I labeled that person as mean, right? Yeah, so as you nicely said, taking ownership of our contribution to the situation is one way to ensure that we don't judge when we are discriminating and assessing our company.
Right.
Another thing I find very helpful is holding fluid and temporary assessments of people so that we're not blind to new information and hold outdated views about them, but we understand them in real time.
Right.
And a technique that I find particularly useful is by asking yourself 4 simple words. Is it really true? So for example, in that instance when someone made a body shaming comment and I was triggered and labeled that person as mean, what I could have done was just ask myself, is it really true that this person is mean?
Right. And
naturally, when you ask yourself that, you will begin listing all the times that this person, all your experiences with this person, and realize that that label is not a logical conclusion but an emotional reaction, because there have been times where that person has not been mean to you, right? So it keeps your views of people shorter and helps you also separate the behavior from the person, and also helps to ensure that you can tell if it's an emotional reaction or a very objective understanding of a person.
Right.
But what are some other practical tips for managing these issues we've been discussing that you can share, Aish?
No, I think that's, we can clearly relate, right? I mean, if I think about some of the stuff I've done in the past, I would hope that people wouldn't hold it against me now. So I think it's important that we keep our assessment temporal, right? We understand that we might change, but other people might change too, and we kind of give people that opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, if I look at my Facebook history, I just cringe every single time that Facebook reminds me what I was like a year ago or 2 years ago. So,
oh my gosh, yeah. I know what you mean. Sometimes I read messages, I'm like, did I write that?
Yeah.
Who is this person?
Imposter.
Yeah. None of us want to be judged long term, so let's think twice about before we do that to others as well. But yeah, I think very practically, I mean, if I were to break this down, I think there are types of situations, like you alluded to earlier as well, where someone has bad habits or is indulging in bad behavior, and there is still some good in them, right? So this is something I tend to find easier when it comes to labeling. like you were saying so nicely, you summed up, we avoid that labeling by focusing the assessment on how we feel, right? And I don't think if somebody has behaved in a mean way to you, it's not at all inappropriate to react in that moment, and even make known that behavior is not okay, that you don't condone or accept that. I think that is perfectly fine, but we can always do that in a kind way, right?
Right.
And so by focusing the assessment on how we feel, where we dive into intuition, it just gives us that opportunity to think, is it time for me to stay away? And then if it is, then you do. But you might be in some scenarios where you can't, you want to stay away, but you can't, right?
Mm.
Which could be like it's a colleague that you see all the time or a family member. And here, one thing that I found helpful practically is to find some empathy, right? And sometimes just reminding myself that, you know what, I've had a very privileged upbringing with great role models around me and being exposed to like good values, but not everybody has. And maybe this person just needs more information or exposure to the right tools. And, sometimes I very sneakily suggest a good movie or a book that might give them some opportunities to learn.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, and sometimes it's very well-meaning people. Suddenly, I'm thinking even of my own, like my grandma, right? She's from a totally different generation and doesn't necessarily have the same information that you or I do about very specific topics. And she's very open-minded. We'll show her a movie about this and she'll be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, right? and very, very willing to change her own opinion or position on something.
Right.
And so I think that can be a very helpful tool. And in the same way, it can work both ways, right? I can also learn and improve with the help of some of these people, because I too have some bad habits, believe it or not. And I also have good in me, right? So I think that's where the empathy kind of comes in. But then we also might be in situations where a person exhibits bad behavior or habits, but then they're so entrenched in so much of it that their character is actually quite bad too. And this I find much harder to navigate, because it's so much easier to love people when there is some good in them, right? Yeah. And so here what I tend to do is actually step away from trying to navigate it at a conscious level. And I lean on my subconscious. And this is something I've been doing for quite a while, actually. When I'm having difficulties with people, I do like the light meditation. I try to do it daily, but I'm not always very good about it.
Daily.
And at the end of the light meditation, there's a bit where you send good energy around the world. Right. But then I at that moment, I take the opportunity to focus on visualizing these specific people that I'm having difficulties with, and I send good energy that way, right? Right. And surprisingly, I've had some pretty good success with that. Like, amazing. I don't know if it's just making me calmer or they're feeling the vibes somehow, but something tends to change in the dynamic. And in some instances, I've been really surprised that the bad behavior has stopped, right? So it's really nice to feel like something I'm doing, maybe at the subconscious level, is helping me.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And then, there are sometimes situations where even that can be difficult. And I can share a quick example here. I went through a very uncomfortable and stressful situation where a person that I trusted misused my trust, basically, and did some very bad things, and it affected lots of people. And I was so shocked by this whole situation, was so taken aback, and it took me months to process my emotions. And there was just like a lot of hurt, disappointment, anger, and I couldn't even initially think about this person without feeling terrible and just like judging them as evil. And then I thought, okay, I clearly can't handle this at a conscious level. Let me try it subconscious, right? But when I was doing this kind of meditation, when it's still very raw, like in the early days, like visualizing somebody that causes you so much harm is actually kind of like torturing yourself, right? So then I had to stop doing that initially as well. But I waited, right, until I had dealt with my emotions in a practical way for myself. Right. Then when I felt calmer, I could rely on my subconscious to help me start to accept, less judgment towards this person. Right. And then, later on, when everything had, I had reconciled the whole event with myself, this instant actually sparked me to make a very big change in my life. And after a while, I was so happy that I did this, that I made this change. And I just started to think about, wow, okay, this terrible thing triggered so much good in my life. And I started to call this person my mantra, the character from the Ramayana, where like somebody needs to play this kind of evil part. And it brought this big force of change in my life, and it just kind of reminded me to take a step back, right, from the day-to-day of what we're living, from the day-to-day reactions to things we have, and just reminding myself, like, you know what, at the end of the day, we're all just like little pawns in this game of life, and we're all here to play some kind of part. And so that also is actually a very helpful, practical tool to just like stop for a moment and think, I feel terrible now, but you know what? In the large scheme of things, this will be a blip in, someday in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe if I sum up like some of these practical tips, right, I'd say, at the level of, your mind, your conscious level, you summed it up earlier as well. Focus your assessment on how you feel around someone and less on assessing their character, and try to find empathy if that's possible. And if, that's even more difficult, then let's move things a bit towards the intellect, to our subconscious level, and use a simple tool like meditation to subconsciously send good energy to somebody, and perhaps love if that's doable, right? And then really bringing things even higher level to like, what the Atma is like, just reminding ourselves like we're all just playing a part. Everybody has their own spiritual journey, and we're all just here to learn and grow.
Thank you so much, Aish, for your deeply insightful thoughts on judging our company. Dear listeners, it's now time for some prasadam pills. 1. We can assess our company without having to judge them. Judging is an emotional reaction. Discriminating is seeing things as they are. So let's check if we're truly being present in our assessment, or if our past is replaying itself. 2. Separating a person's behavior from their individuality and holding temporary opinions about people can help ensure we are still able to be kind and loving. 3. When we are not at a space where we can empathize with another's behavior, we can remind ourselves that even the most difficult people are just playing a part for our highest good. And in gratitude for how they're helping our spiritual progress, we can send love subconsciously through light meditation. Next on InSAIde Scoop, we're exploring Maya. We've heard so much about Maya and illusion, but who is she really, and who are we? Until next Friday, happy scooping!